you get the pot up
Exactly.
for treats.
Exactly. Yeah,
I
she
feel
just
like-
can't help it. When she hears voices come on my computer, she gets all sorts of excited.
I don't know if if she understands the name, but my cat likes to sit on my mouse.
That's funny.
That is funny.
All right, we are live.
All right.
Sorry.
Sorry.
Being recorded.
Okay, guys. Well, good morning, all. Thanks as always for being here. Really excited to wrap up, we hope, knock on wood, the discussion today of all of our final code provisions. So I think we could probably just go ahead and dive right in. Our agenda, we'll do a quick approval of the meeting minutes from last time. We'll quickly review our voting protocols and how this meeting will carry into our final meeting or our third and then final meeting. And then we'll spend the rest of our time working through those final code provisions. And I believe we only have about 7 or 8 left. So we're getting really close. At the end, we'll wrap up and tell you what to expect for next steps and figure out if we need our meeting for tomorrow as well. So before I move on, would anybody like to make a motion for approving the meeting minutes?
Yeah, make a motion to approve both sets of meeting minutes or just the main as written.
Thanks, Tim.
I'll second that.
Thank you, Rick. All right. All in favor, please say aye.
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 And any noes, any that do not approve. All right, hearing none, meeting minutes are approved. Thank you, guys. All right, so we'll just run through very quickly again what we're hoping to accomplish here today. Last meeting, we discussed our code provisions. We did some straw polling. Today, we're going to do the exact same thing, getting through the rest of our provisions. And at the end, we'll figure out if we need our 2-hour session that's on our calendars tomorrow. Once we finish discussing and voting, doing our preliminary straw polling on all of the elements, we will take the code package and we'll create a clean version and a red line version, incorporating all of your guys' comments and feedback. We will send that out to you guys ASAP this week. So we'll aim to get that to you guys on Thursday this week. And then our final meeting is next Monday, May 1st, where we'll do our final votes and final discussion on all of the provisions. Any questions about where we're headed or what we're doing today? All right, seeing none. So today's objectives, this is just a little bit of repeating. We're going to go through all of the remaining code provisions, discuss and deliberate them. If you guys need us to look into anything between now and a next meeting, we can do that. And we'll attempt to resolve any outstanding issues and draft the final code language, and then straw poll to make sure that the entire executive committee agrees that, or not the entire, excuse me, a majority agree to the code changes. And same process as last time, so nothing new here. Just a reminder from our last meeting, the provisions that we have left to discuss can fall into these 3 groups. And at the last board meeting, executive committee meeting, we decided as a executive committee that we would discuss and deliberate on all of these sections. And so we're going to go through all the green ones, all the gray ones, all the blue ones. Any provision that's highlighted in green is required by state statute. Any provision highlighted in gray is not explicitly required, but often accompanies those required provisions. And anything highlighted in blue is not required. So you'll see these color highlights through the PowerPoint today, and just want to give everyone a quick reminder of what those colors mean. Okay, any questions? Feel good? We dive in? All righty. So the first provision we have on our list today is jurisdictional option for the solar ready codes. And so this can apply both for residential or commercial. This is a construction documentation certificate. You can see the vote count at the bottom of the slide there. The comments against this provision were that it was beyond our scope, and some board members felt that the jurisdictional options should be treated the same across the board. And so there was some abstentions in wanting the board to sort of align what happens here with what happens with the rest of the jurisdictional options. So with that, I will open it up to board discussion. Tim, go for it.
Yeah, thank you. My comment would be on this. I would not have any issue just requiring this on the residential side, but it is unenforceable, in my opinion, on the commercial side, especially given some of these larger buildings that have numerous panel boards, distribution panels, maybe not even water heaters in on shell buildings. So I would suggest that if we go forward, it's just on the residential side and not included on the commercial side. It makes sense on residential because you're going to have one panel board and then typically a water heater or a furnace. That's my comment.
Thanks, Tim. Yeah, go for it, Ron.
I'd agree with that and just add that in the residential side, it's less likely that future owners are going to have easy access to the drawings, whereas in the commercial side, that's commonly available.
Okay, thank you, Ron. Any other thoughts on this option from our other committee members? Okay. I'm not hearing any, but stop me if you have something to say. So if we go to our editable version, what I'm hearing from those committee members who spoke up is that this would make sense to be added as a provision that's required under residential, and remove this as a commercial provision. Yeah, Ron.
I just found one of my notes about this, and I was thinking that maybe it just this last sentence needs to end after the word location. I don't think we need to specify who does it. I think we just want to make sure it happens. So it needs to be,
Okay.
mounted at convene. But I would delete the section by the builder or registered design professional. We don't care who does that.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you, Ron. Okay. Tim, yeah, go for it.
Yeah, and just to be clear, so this would still just continue to be added in as an option, and just like an appendix, the jurisdiction would have to adopt this option. That would be clear if they wanted to.
Yes, we can, so that would be up to the board to decide, but we absolutely can keep it as a jurisdictional option, just as an option for residential versus commercial, or alternatively, it could be moved into the body of the code. Mm-hmm. You go for it, Tim.
Yeah, thank you. I wouldn't even be opposed to making this in the body on the residential side, because it's like as Ron said, and I agree with taking out that last couple of words, because it's easily enforceable, and I think it's a good idea on the residential side.
Okay, thanks, Tim.
Yeah, I'm also in support of making it part of the body of code for the residential.
Okay, so I'm going to just add, I'm looking at the body of the code right now, and so this would make it look like if we did certificate would look like this, and I'm just going to turn this red so we know that this is the part that has changed. Okay. Any other thoughts from folks here? Adam, go for it.
I think we would probably just want to take out chapter 4 part 1 / chapter 4 part 2 and replace it with this section or this part, seeing as it will be in the residential part now.
Great call. And other requirements of this section?
I think we should call it this part, just because it's in the residential, like chapter 4 is in multiple parts and it's in the residential part. So
Right. Okay. Thanks. Good flag. All right. Any other thoughts from folks?
I guess I would wonder, in the accompanying documents that we put out with this code, are we going to provide maybe like an example of what this certificate looks like? I'm just thinking when we say, it's got to include the requirements, someone might be confused as to exactly what requirements are included. So I guess I would just advocate for us providing an example or a template for people to copy so they know really what we're intending.
Sure, Ron. I think that would be definitely something we could we could put together. I would ask you and Tim if you guys have examples that we could, at least like a format we could take and then include the specifics of the solar ready zone.
Yeah, I don't know if the format needs to be really so particular, so much as really just a listing maybe of just what information needs to be on there.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't have an example. We haven't required that. So
Yeah.
Possibly a local, like a jurisdiction that is doing something along the line, we could plagiarize that. Borrow it, I guess is the better term.
Share
it. Yeah, Brad, go for it.
Yeah, I was going to say, I can provide some information on the solar ready zone. We've been requiring that for some time. I do sort of have a question as to what this might look like. When we look at solar ready zone on plans, it's usually a fairly large sheet, of the roof section, indicating what the solar ready zone looks like and where it is. Is that what we're thinking in regard to this?
It's a good question. And before I answer, I think I want to pull up the IECC solar ready, because that's I believe where this original language came from, just so we can see the intent that was included in here, because I think our language has changed a bit since we decided to move this out. Oh yeah, Adam, sorry, I didn't see if you. It says a permanent certificate, this is the IECC now, indicating the solar ready zone and other requirements of a section shall be posted near the electrical distribution panel, water heater, other conspicuous location. And that's from the residential side. So yes, it looks like the certificate itself is meant to indicate visually where the solar ready zone is, as well as details on perhaps the electric service space that's reserved, where the connection pathway was, things of that nature. Yeah, Adam.
Well, I guess maybe I would just wonder, because I think anyone who would, any builder or contractor who would come in and need to understand the particulars of the solar ready zone would probably pull the actual construction drawings, wouldn't they? So, I think this is mostly to indicate, Brad, to the homeowner that there is a solar ready zone and here's like a general idea of where it is on your roof, not necessarily like the exact technical specifics.
Thanks, Adam. Yeah, go for it, Brad.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head there, Adam. That's kind of what I was thinking. I suppose we could, if we do provide an example, just an area where we could indicate like which section of roof, like if it's the south section, the west section. That's all I was thinking.
Okay. Awesome. Yeah, Tim, go for it.
Yeah, so I think by the state statute, we are only required to keep copies of a new residential set of plans for 1 year. So with that, I mean, in Broomfield, we keep them forever because they're electronic. So everybody has access to that. I don't know if all jurisdictions in the state will have ability to keep plans longer than the state statute. So the concept of, the homeowner in 3 or 4 years would be able to go get the plans. I'm not sure, the concept of where would they be able to get those if they didn't get them when they bought the house, or if it's a resale. So I guess that's just a comment for that and what would be required, maybe doing something with the certificate. You could reduce the size of the roof plan and then just have that as part of a certificate. I don't know.
I think if it generally describes the area, I think that might actually accomplish quite a bit. I mean, really the ultimate test of, is the solar ready zone appropriate for this future solar panels are going to come when the solar installer looks at the roof and says, ah, yeah, we have a good spot for it. And so I think there is, if we have a solar ready zone identified as something on, a portion of the roof, that informs the homeowner, and so they're less likely to say, oh, that'd be a good place for, a skylight or a sun tube, and then maybe they're just aware of its existence. So I don't think we necessarily need, precise construction drawings to be useful.
Okay, I think that guidance is really helpful. So if we are putting together an example, it could say, describe in words, south facing roof, this portion of the roof. It could be a description, or, we have so much technology. People could take a photo of the plans, insert a photo on the permanent certificate. I think there'd be a lot of ways to easily get that visual in there, but we could maybe have it as a words or visual or whatever. Just make sure it's something indicates where that solar zone might be. Okay, awesome. So we can work on that. As far as how this code language reads, are there any other suggested changes to this? I'm hearing none, but I'll let you guys read it for a moment. Okay. Still seeing no hands. So why don't we do our preliminary straw poll? So if you are in favor of this section RS 402.9 as rewritten here, as rewritten on the bottom half of this slide here, please raise your hand. Okay, that is 5 votes for. Thank you guys. You can lower your hands. And that was all of our executive committee members, so we don't need a no vote. So this one passes. Thank you guys. All right, we'll send it back into presenter mode for just a moment. Okie dokie. Here we go. So our next section is the commercial EV ready code section. And our first provision to review is section CV 502.1.6, which is quantity. Excuse me, one of the requirements under quantity. And this provision says all attached garages with direct connection to an apartment will be required to have 1 EV ready space. And I believe, Tim, this comment against this one came from you, but correct me if I'm wrong, that we should change the word apartment to dwelling unit because there is a lack of definition for the word apartment. And so we wanted to make sure that that was resolved. So I will pause and open it up for board discussion. Tim.
Yeah, that was actually, this was, the original was my proposed amendment or to add this. And there was another board member, I forget who exactly that was, that offered the amendment to change the apartment to dwelling unit, which since dwelling unit is a defined term and apartment wasn't, which I fully supported. So I think that if everybody's still on board with the concept of what I proposed in the beginning, I'm behind the change to get a defined term in there.
Thanks, Tim. And could you offer up which term you think that should be?
To change it to dwelling unit.
Okay.
So that is what an apartment is.
Okay.
But that was my intent for what this would be.
Thanks, Tim. Rick?
Thanks. Hey, Kim, thank you. Just a quick question. Sorry, non-technical guy here asking this question, but where it refers to have 1 EV ready space, is that a space within the structure for the electrical component versus a space where an EV station actually will be installed exterior on the now on the dwelling unit or near the dwelling unit? I'm just trying to understand exactly what that means.
Well, it's my understanding EV ready matches like what the same language or the same requirement as a single family, 1 and 2 family, that it would be having the space, the wiring, the junction box or whatever that ends up being inside at least one inside the garage. So not on the outside, but on the inside of the garage.
Okay, it's not physically a space to park a vehicle. This is within the unit itself, the electrical capacity aspects. When you refer to ready space, EV ready space.
It would be in the enclosed garage.
Okay.
Just like a detached garage to your house, or a house, I should say.
All right, I think that clears up my question. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, this would not require any new space to be added. It's simply saying if there is a direct connection to the garage. Okay, well, I've heard Tim's suggested change here, so we're going to move on to this slide and we'll make that change here. Oh, geez. All right. Any other thoughts from folks on this provision changing apartment over to dwelling unit? I'm seeing none. Okay. For all those in favor of accepting the change, the second version of this provision as written on the bottom of this slide with Tim's edit, please raise your hand now. Okay, I see 5 votes in favor of this proposed change. Thank you, guys. You can lower your hands. And that is all 5 board executive committee members who voted, so we do not need to have a no vote. Fantastic. So now we're going to go through the move to the table. And what we wanted to do to just remind everybody where we came from with this table, we're going to walk through a couple slides that speak to the history of where this table started and where it landed. So this is the table this is the current table in the code. And remember that these first 3 rows here did not receive enough votes. So within this table, the whole of the table is required except for this EV capable light space. This section was not required by state statute. That's why it's highlighted blue here. So if we take a look back in time, this was our original proposed EV readiness table. So just to orient everybody, because it flipped, EV capable light is now on this side. It goes to capable ready installed. So those flipped in our end table. So we started with 2 EV ready spaces for all parking lots with 10 or less spaces. For commercial buildings and R3, R4 occupancies with more than 10, we had 10% EV capable, 8% EV ready, 2% EV installed. And then for R2 occupancies with more than 10 parking spaces, we had 30% EV capable light, 10% EV capable, 15 EV ready, and 5% EV installed. So following our first round of deliberation and straw polling on the EV readiness provisions, this is where our table landed. So we changed the order of the columns. So to throw everybody off again, now they're back in order of EV installed, EV ready, EV capable light. Within this time, we also created a definition for commercial buildings and residential buildings. And if you guys remember, residential buildings are 1 and 2 family dwellings and townhomes, and then everything else is a commercial building. And so with that definition, we updated this table and the wording got a lot simpler because we could just reference our definitions here. We also, for commercial buildings, except R2 occupancies, we added 10% EV capable light spaces. So the R2 occupancies with greater than 10 parking spaces, nothing changed here. We added 10% for the commercial buildings that are not R2 occupancies. And then again, we just updated this wording. So commercial buildings were entirely covered here. Okay, and then we had our public comment period. And following the public comment period, we had several board members suggesting changes to this table. So our major changes here. we moved the lots with 10 or less parking spaces to have one EV ready and one EV installed. And that was a change from 2 EV ready spaces. We also added a row for R2 occupancies that were fewer than 10 parking spaces to make sure that the lots that were R2 lots that had less than 10 parking spaces aligned with the requirements of R2 for lots that had more than 10 parking spaces. So we pulled in 15% EV ready, 10% EV capable, and 10% EV capable light. Okay, so that brings us to where we are today. Again, these first 3 rows did not pass. Our R2 occupancies with greater than 10 parking spaces did pass. So we have this row is complete and will stay in the code. And the rest we're going to talk through. Before I move on to our discussion slides, are there any questions or does anyone want to go back and take a look at those old tables? Feel good? Yeah, Tim.
Yeah, thank you. So just for clarity, the way the legislation language says, well, let me see it. It starts out saying that you'll need the EV spaces in 20% or more of the parking spaces in the garage or parking area. Is that correct? Just for clarity.
That is correct.
So with that, in an R2, when we added that third line, R2 occupancy with fewer than 10, then that would be 35% of the spaces, which would be, if you had 9 spaces, so anyway, be a lot of spaces.
Yeah, thank you, Tim. Okay, seeing no more hands, so we'll continue on and we're going to discuss these rows one at a time. So we'll start with all commercial buildings with 10 or less parking spaces, and recall that commercial buildings again are anything that any building that is not a 1 to 2 family dwelling unit or townhome. So the comments against this row is that there's an excessive cost to require an EVSE installed for small commercial lots, and that was a concern of board members in pushing additional cost onto small commercial lots. Another board member brought up that utility rebates are only available if things are not mandated, and so by including an EV installed space, we take off the table in some cases the ability for those folks to earn rebates when installing that EV charger. And then generally we had some comments from the board to move back to the 2 EV ready spaces. So I will leave it there. And Tim, or excuse me, Will, I'll pass it to you.
Thank you. First, a question. So given that we're talking about parking lots with fewer than 10 spaces, and we're here apparently aiming for, basically 20%. But in practice, if you do install an EVSE, it's usually dual port and would be 2 spaces. So I'm trying to understand exactly what it would mean to have 1 EV ready requirement and 1 EVSE installed. Would that actually be required in effect, given that infrastructure will generally serve 2 spaces? Or are we really saying that you would end up with four spaces that are either EVSE installed or EV ready?
So that's a good question. And I think we have that question covered in the code language, and I'm just going to pull it up so I don't misspeak. We have under quantity for this section that, or excuse me, no, it's in the requirements under EV ready or EV capable. And it says if you have basically a charger that splits the 2, that counts as 2 spaces. So, and correct me if I'm wrong. Let's see, let me find the actual language.
So in practice, this would probably mean then that everyone would just have 2 EVSE installed spaces, because you would put in a charger that serves 2 spaces and you wouldn't do another separate EV ready space.
I think yes, if you installed a dual port EVSE, that would cover you. If you did not install a dual port charger, it would not.
Okay. Thank
Tim.
you.
Yeah, good question. Tim, go for it.
Oh, yep, thank you. So going back to the International Building Code and the accessibility requirements for these that now appear in the IBC 21 IBC, sorry, mind blank there. So there's an exception in chapter 11 of the 21 that says for R2 occupancies, the EV spaces do not have to meet any accessibility requirements. So when we get into these small parking lots of 10 or less, there needs to be at least one accessible parking space. And in addition, not in addition, but that parking space, if you only put in one or need one, needs to be van accessible, which is basically taking up 2 space widths. And then the EV space, I'm not sure if the EV space can then be used. I would make the call that you couldn't put the EV space in the same space that it's a van accessible space, because they're 2 different requirements, and you're going to be putting some, you'll typically have signage up saying, you know, you can't use this EV space unless you're using it, I guess. I'm not quite sure if there's language for that. So we're taking up quite a few spaces in a small parking lot with this. And as Will points out, you're going to end up with one or the other. I mean, if you do the EVSE installed, then you're going to have 2 spaces, and then you got a van accessible. So you got a 10 space parking lot, and you only have 7 spaces for regular parking. So I'm concerned about this requirement here in these small spaces for.
Thanks, Tim. Yeah, go for it, Will.
So this is one where I guess I'm probably convinced that it makes sense to, rather than have one EVSE installed and one EV ready, to simply say 2 EV ready spaces. You know, given that I think the short-term need for charging is not nearly as high in commercial uses as it is in residential. And for these small developments, having them able to access utility rebates does seem like a real benefit. And so I would say that in this one, I would be comfortable with it being 2 EV ready spaces for small commercial.
Okay. Yeah, thank you, Will. Tim, I'll go back to you.
Yeah, sorry, I'm gonna stand corrected with my earlier comment that I thought this one was the R2 small parking lots. This is just the regular parking lots. With that being said, then the IBC would require these EV installed spaces to meet the accessibility, which would be a van accessible space. So what we'll end up doing is having those 2, if they end up getting installed, a dual port, then both of those, one of them would have to be accessible. So we're taking up a lot of space on these non-R2. And I think that you don't need to provide the accessibility requirements on an EV ready or EV capable.
Okay. So Tim, would you be then in support of Will's proposed change to move back to 2 EV ready space?
Yes.
Okay. Fantastic. One thing I did want to flag here, and it's because we have it written in the other rows. So we have all commercial buildings with 10 or less parking spaces. And then below a separate row that says R2 occupancies with fewer than 10 parking spaces. Do we need to include, and this is maybe a question for our enforcement folks, all commercial buildings except R2 occupancies in this row to make sure that we're not confusing folks if those rows have different requirements? Because R2 currently is defined as a commercial building.
I would agree with that, because in the next row it says commercial buildings except R2 occupancies with greater than 10. So that I think that would be an appropriate clarification for reducing confusion.
Okay. Okay, let me throw that in there. Okay. Rick, yeah, go for it.
Thanks, Kimberly. Again, another non-technical question here, just trying to clarify. In older neighborhoods in our state, probably urban areas primarily, where traditional buildings have been renovated, sometimes there's commercial on the street level that's been there for maybe a century or longer. And then there's housing on the second or maybe third floors. So in regard to this particular category of EV ready or EV installed, I know it's dealing with commercial per se, but if there's non-conforming off-street parking already, you know, they just accept what's already been there. And sometimes there's not parking at all. They have to use the street. How does that relate to the residential piece of, and I assume that's what, when you talk about R2, I assume that's what you mean. It's actually a mixed use kind of development. Can somebody answer that for me?
So I'll share the way that we have it in code, and then I would love for others in the board to chime in. The way we have it written right now is that the total space allotment from these 4 space types will be determined based on the table, based on the total number of parking spaces provided for the development. So if there is an intentional spot linked to the remodel or the retrofit or whatever's happening, let's say there's 20 for the multifamily space that have been allocated, they would fall under the R2 requirements. If it's 10 for the retail space that's provided, those would follow the commercial building requirements. So I think it would, again, I think, and Ron, Tim, Brad, correct me if I'm wrong here, it would align itself with like whatever zoning requires for minimum parking, and then these standards apply.
All right, that's helpful. If you're uncertain about that, Kim, I would like to hear a building official's opinion.
I was gonna say, can someone confirm that that's the way that would be considered? Tim, go for it.
I think that's how I would look at that. Sorry. This is going to be it's a great point to bring up, Rick, not just with the older communities, but we've got a couple of areas that were live work townhomes built with, and the only parking other than the back, you know, drive-in garages, tuck under garages for the unit is on the street for the retail portions along. So I'm not sure how I'd be enforcing this if you know, somebody built a new live work row townhome project that just has street parking. So I'm sure I'll find out how to enforce that. I don't have an answer for how that is, you know, if you're using existing parking or street parking.
Thanks, Tim. Yeah, go for it, Will. And then Adam. Will, you're still muted.
Thank you. Yeah, I certainly wouldn't want this to be interpreted as requiring a building to install parking spaces. So, which I suppose having it be a number of spaces rather than a percentage does. I wonder if there's a way of framing it that makes it clear that if you're not installing off-street parking, you don't have to provide spaces. Because we certainly wouldn't want to create a minimum parking requirement.
Right. Adam?
I just want to note further up in the EV commercial electric vehicle ready section, it does say in the very initial paragraph where new parking is provided for commercial buildings. So if parking was already there, you don't have to convert that parking to EV ready requirements. It's only if new parking for that commercial structure. And I think the same language exists for the residentials, like where new vehicle parking spaces are installed. So when we're talking about existing parking, even if it's for a new building, if you're taking advantage of existing parking, those would not have to comply.
Thanks for pointing that out, Ellen.
Yeah. Awesome. Thanks, Adam. All right. Get that out of there. Okay. Coming back to our table. Any further suggested thoughts or changes for row 1 here? I'm seeing no hands, so why don't we do our straw poll? All in favor of adopting the row as seen on the slide for all commercial buildings except R2 occupancies with 10 or less parking spaces, please raise your hand. Okay, I see 4 votes for adopting this. Thank you guys. You can lower your hands. Any executive committee members that do not approve the table as written, please raise your hand. Okay, thank you. And there's 1 vote against this table. So this will pass. Thank you all. All right, moving on to our second row of the table. So this is commercial buildings except R2 occupancies with greater than 10 parking spaces. Comments against this one were that it exceeds the requirement of the statute too far. And one board member suggested they just want to see 20% EV capable in this row of the table. So I will open it up to board discussion. Will.
So this is one where the proposal actually seems pretty reasonable to me. You know, I guess I'm not concerned with it, the fact that it's exceeding the minimum standards set in statute. The statute said minimum of 20%, but clearly authorizes the board to go beyond that. And I think that the first 3 lines essentially satisfy that minimum requirement of at least 20% that is EV ready, capable, or installed. And I mean, the cost of the EV capable light is so low that I don't think it creates any significant burden to add that extra 10% and adds a lot of flexibility. So from my perspective, this one seems pretty reasonable.
Thanks, Will. Any other board thoughts? Brett?
Yeah, I just want to support what Will said. I'm completely in favor of how it's written right now. I think we definitely have to consider that, electrification of vehicles is inevitable. And in the next 15 years, having the capacity to build stuff out may prove useful. So I would support this as is.
Thanks, Brad. Any other thoughts from our other board members? Mo?
I know 1 row already was approved that includes the last column, EV capable light space and the percentage associated with it. But can you just remind us, or somebody remind, especially the voting members, why, even though this is not required in the statute, it's legally okay to add that particular column?
I'm happy to jump in there or let David weigh in as well. So the statute merely says for commercial buildings, commercial and multifamily, that they must have a combination of at least 20% of spaces that are EVSE installed, EV ready, or EV capable. It doesn't say anything about not allowing other space types or more than 20%. It just says that you must have at least 20% of those. So in the combination of those 3 columns, we do have 20%, and the board felt that it was appropriate to add the additional 10%.
And I'd just add that this was in response to the board's consideration of the cost effectiveness charge within the statute to aim for maximum flexibility while saving on costs as much as possible. Okay, any other questions, thoughts, comments? Seeing none, I have heard from 2 committee members that we would like to, that they would advocate for keeping this table with no changes. So if that, we'll do our straw poll and we'll move down to this one. All committee members in favor of adopting this row of the code without any changes, please raise your hand. Okay, I see 5 hands raised. All right, thank you, everybody. This provision passes. All right, and now, last but not least, our third row of the table. So this is the row for R2 occupancies with fewer than 10 parking spaces. The comment to keep this row was that the board was charged with the responsibility of creating this table, and they workshopped it together. And so there was a board member that expressed their disappointment that voting was moving to a smaller group because they agreed with what was included. And then again, the comment against is that board member felt we should scale everything back to just be 20% EV capable per the state statute minimum. The one thing I do want to flag with this row is that the way that this is worded, so I recommend we make a change here. We're not capturing parking lots with 10 spaces. The way that, you just go back up to this table, the way that this is written, all commercial buildings with 10 or less parking spaces, this is R2 occupancies with fewer than 10. So we're missing that sweet spot of the 10 and fewer parking spaces. So just want to flag that in case a committee member wants to adjust the language for this row to align with our first row to make sure we're capturing that. And so with that, I will move us back here and open it up for board thoughts. Tim, go for it.
Yeah, thank you. I'm glad you pointed that out, where it would be 10 or fewer to match, because between those two, if you had a parking lot of 10, then you wouldn't be able to enforce anything. But with that being said, I'm going to go back to my original comments that I was incorrectly saying on the commercial side. And so with this being, say, an R2 occupancy with 10 or fewer, it's requiring 35% of the spaces, non-EVSE installed, and then you come into play with the requirement for an van accessible parking space, which is 1 out of 10, so you're losing 10%. Now you're 35. I think for these small parking lots, this is excessive. And to go back, my opinion would go back to at least just the 20% minimum.
Okay, thanks, Tim. Will.
Yeah, on this one, I would share a somewhat different perspective. You know, my concern on the residential side is that since the vast majority of charging happens at home, people really are going to have a very hard time having an electric vehicle and being able to charge it if they don't have home charging. And that, you know, new construction taking place now is essentially going to lock in those parking lots for decades to come. And, you know, even just under the federal rules that were just adopted, or I'm sorry, that the EPA just announced last week, those are effectively going to mandate a 50% EV market share by the end of the decade. So I think we're going to be creating really significant problems for future tenants if there aren't a larger percentage of spaces that are capable cheaply of being converted to allow charging. So I'm comfortable not including any EVSE installed spaces, but I think it is important to have some EV ready spaces for the near term where tenants or residents could relatively easily install a charger. And I'm very supportive of having higher percentage of EV capable and EV capable light. I mean, I would probably go higher on the EV capable light, but I would be supportive of this proposal.
Okay, thank you, Will. Ron. Ron, you're muted.
Thank you. Sorry about that. I'm curious, Will, on the EV capable light, how much higher would you think would be more appropriate?
You know, given how inexpensive it is to do EV capable light, I don't know that I want to depart so far from what the board has already considered, but I would probably have something closer to the 30% requirement that was in the requirements for larger parking lots. Again, just because I think that the cost is so low that I don't think that creates any burden for a small parking lot to do the EV capable light. You know, I could see reducing the percentage of EV ready, but then increasing the EV capable by a larger amount. I mean, if we wanted to make those changes, although it may be simpler to, again, simply consider the proposal that's before us.
Ron, did you want to share any additional thoughts in response?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I do see fundamentally this is the place where I think there's the most tension between the rate of EV dominating the market, and then who is going to be living in a place where they can charge comfortably at home. I do think in many ways this is probably the most important section of this whole chart, because it just accommodates so much of the marketplace. So I'm comfortable with making this even more aggressive than what's shown in the table. I think it's just an important place, and it's where there's going to be this greatest disparity as we move forward. I mean, when we do these constructions, and it's going to be so much harder later to come back and retrofit these things. So I guess I'm comfortable approving it like it is, but I would also be comfortable making it more aggressive than what's shown here.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks, Ron. Tim.
Thank you. So just going back just to the basic numbers, you have a parking lot with 10 spaces. One of them by the IBC will need to be a van accessible. So now you have 9 spaces, and say in 3 years, an apartment developer has 35% of their spaces, which means 4 spaces, rounding up, EV basically ready, capable. And then they decide, okay, well, this makes sense. We're going to go ahead and do EVSE installed on all 4 of those. And now you've created a parking lot with only 5 spaces available for the tenants. And I understand the concept of where the market's going to be and how many people are going to be owning EVs in 10 or 20 or 30 years. But in the short term, I think you're really doing a disservice to the people who are renting these places, because it's my understanding that when you do an EV installed, we being jurisdiction would require a permit to do that, basically electrical permit. But the signage is typically going to be put on, you can't use it. It depends on the jurisdiction, I think. So I think it's getting excessive on a small parking space. I don't have a problem on the big parking lots, but on a 10 or less, I'm really disagreeing with these numbers.
Thanks, Tim. We'll go Adam, and then Ron, and then Brad.
I think I would just make the point that one, especially if you're primarily focusing on ready, capable, or capable light spaces, the impetus is then on the building owner to go choose when to install those EVSE, that EVSE equipment, right? And I highly doubt that an apartment owner or a condo association is going to go install half of the spaces EVSE if not a single person who lives in that unit, or if not a single person who lives in that facility has an electric vehicle. Why would they go to the expense of doing that if no one has an electric vehicle, and thus limiting the spaces? So I think that there would certainly be some in the decision making of when and how to install EVSE, they would be taking into account what the owners of those units have, owners or renters of those units have.
Thanks, Adam. Ron?
Yeah, I guess I would comment. I'm not sure, Tim, that there is this prohibition on. Let's just say that let's say the requirement was that every single spot had to have EVSE installed. you could do that. You could have a parking lot. Every spot has chargers, and it wouldn't, there wouldn't be any necessarily. There's no requirement that those spots are prohibited to be parked in if you have a combustion-based vehicle. So I don't know that if by making these EV capable or EV charging spots, that prohibits their use by anybody else. So I'm not sure if you're dividing up the parking lot into spots that you can park and parts you can't. But I don't think there's anything in our rules that we've been talking about that set it up that way. So I think we can certainly install a higher percentage of these, and maybe one day we'll get to a spot where there's EV capable parking spots all over the place. And if you still have a combustion vehicle, you might need to park in a spot that is EV capable.
Yeah, thanks, Ron. Brad?
Yeah, although Adam really kind of touched upon exactly what I was thinking, I do want to just voice support for what he said and really see this as something being driven by demand solely. So I support it as is.
Thanks, Brad. Tim, I'll go back to you.
Just one last comment on the signage, where I occasionally go shop in different commercial parking lots where they have set up the EV charging stations. I see signage, and I'm not sure if it's done by the municipal code in that particular jurisdiction, but it does say that you can't park there unless you're charging. So I think that'll end up being up to the jurisdiction on how they enforce signage. I don't think that's in our language, but I'm going to be voting against this. I think it's excessive for a small parking lot.
Okay, thanks, Tim. Rick, go for it.
Just again, a question to clarify. This is applicable to new commercial construction. Am I correct?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah,
multifamily, not commercial.
Okay, thank you. I'm leaning towards leaving it as is, primarily because the developer will respond to market demands, and they'll go bigger if they need to, if it means leasing spaces or renting spaces, whatever the case might be. I see the points folks are making about the future and where the demand will be or won't be, but I think demand is going to grow and is growing. So this seems reasonable. 10% of spaces that are capable seems reasonable. So I'm going to vote for it as is. Thank you.
Thank you, Rick. Will.
Hey, just to go back for a moment to the signing issue, just wanted to remind folks of state statute on this. So House Bill 19-1298 was the legislation on EV charging station parking. And what it does is it gives authorization to a property owner to install signage. If that signage is installed, it is then an enforceable violation for a non-EV to park in that spot. But that is the state statute makes that purely optional for a property owner who wishes to install such signage. And again, that's HB 19-1298.
So that would resolve this question about if you have these overlapping requirements, that the accessibility requirements in the code would take first priority, and then the EV charging would be at the discretion of the property owner. Is that what you're saying?
It is the discretion of the property owner whether they wish to install signage that would make it an EV only space, as opposed to a space with an EV charger that anybody may park at.
Thank you. That's helpful.
Yeah, thank you, Will. Okay, so thanks to the board for all of your thoughts on this table. I think we're in a place where we could be ready to vote. I did make the change to align this language with the language in the first row that says all commercial buildings with 10 or less parking spaces. So now this reads R2 occupancies with 10 or less parking spaces to make sure we're capturing that 10 number. So all board members in favor of adopting the row as seen on the screen, please raise your hand. Okay, thank you guys. I see 4 votes for this row. Any board members against this row, please raise your hand. Okay, thank you. I see 1 vote against this row. So this row passes and we will include it as written in the final code package. All right. Thanks everyone. So we're through the toughest of the ones, I think. So we're going to move next to our last 2 provisions, which are the EV jurisdictional options. So the first one is both could apply for both residential and commercial. And this is about disbursement. And so this basically says that all of the EV space type categories shall be dispersed throughout the parking areas and R2 occupancies that contain multiple buildings so that they have roughly the same access to those EV space types. Comments against this were that it's beyond the scope of the state statute. It's already out there and jurisdictions can find this language if they want to adopt it. So it could get confusing if it's included here. And that there's a question on how to enforce this. It's not great code language. So I will open it up for board discussion. Thoughts, comments, questions? Ron.
Yeah, I think we've already established that there's a number of places where there's some guidance documentation that's needed to accompany this, and this topic seems like a really key place to include some of that additional information. So I was thinking about specifically about the fees and this disbursement question. Both of them seem like they're complicated. And that each jurisdiction probably needs to look at this themselves, and maybe this is probably a place, I guess, in my opinion, where we would put forth just, this is something that each jurisdiction should answer, but not necessarily provide a particular requirement in our code.
Thanks, Ron. Tim.
Yeah, I was the board member who made the comment, the last bullet point or the second bullet point on don't know how to enforce it. I don't think it's good code language, given that it's just listed as a jurisdictional option. I think it might be a start for a jurisdiction to be able to figure out how to do it. I know when I take this, I won't be doing the option, or I'll take it and then I'll modify it to make more sense with consultation with my planning group. Thank you.
Thanks, Tim. So Ron, just to make sure I understand your thought here, are you suggesting we remove this from our code package and include mention within like our report and materials that get sent out accompanying this, that this is a topic that folks should consider? Or are you suggesting we keep it in and have that additional explanatory outreach piece?
Well, I mean, I like the idea of including something in the code, but I think that Tim is right that this is as code language is not, it's not there. So it's not like a jurisdiction could just adopt this without further addressing it. It doesn't work that way. So I think if we can think of a way to make it, turn it into some kind of a forcible code language, that would be great. But I'm not seeing a really simple way to do that, which is why I guess I'm saying the whole thing maybe just belongs in an advisory commentary, where we have things we know that they need, their jurisdiction is going to have to define. So for instance, we left additions and significant remodelings. We left that as an undefined term. The code isn't usable until they define it. So that's like our mandatory jurisdictional requirement that they address that. I don't think it's mandatory that they address disbursement and fees, although if they don't address the fees, I could see things getting kind of confusing for building owners. So I think it's really important they do so. And I think that if anyone has large parking lots with multiple buildings sharing it. If you don't address how that works, I think you're going to end up with a really untenable situation. So I think I guess bottom line is I think it needs to be something that the jurisdiction addresses in some way, but they can't just adopt this language as is.
Okay, thanks, Ron. Other thoughts from the board, and I can flip to the service one as well, because Ron's referenced it a couple times. This is the second jurisdictional option here for service fees, and this basically says the property owner is not restricted from collecting a service fee for the use of the EV charger on the property. So those are the two. So these are the sort of the two jurisdictional options in question here. Any other thoughts on what to do with these? Tim?
Yeah, I've got the same comment. I mean, Ron's made some good points. My comment for the first one now with the fees would be the same. I think that could go into that document that's going to go out to help jurisdictions understand intent, et cetera, et cetera. And you got to define the alterations and additions or major alterations. So the fee thing is also not good code language, and so I don't think either one of these even belong in here as an option.
Okay, thanks, Tim. So just thinking through the pieces that our team is going to put out as far as rolling out this code, we'll have the clean code package. We'll include an explanatory code package. So for those on the board, you've seen, it includes explanatory notes above some of the sections that just need a little bit more description. And then accompanying both of those will be a report that dives into some more of the nuances of our conversations throughout the board's process, including what, like EV capable light. What does that mean? Where did that come from? Things like that. So thinking through where these fall, right, we could do two things. We could include these in the code package with that explanatory note that says these things should be vetted and finalized and changed within each jurisdiction before they're adopted. Or we include it just in the final report and say that accompanies the two code packages and say these are two topics that the board felt were important to acknowledge, and we could provide this code language in that report, but not include it within the code package. So just wanted to offer up those options so you guys can sort of think through how this information will come out and it might be presented. Okay. Any thoughts from folks? I guess I'm hearing that perhaps it would be best to strike these both from the code package and include these within the final report, included near or around the mention of major remodels and how that needs to be defined for this code to work. These are other things that jurisdictions could consider to make sure that these code elements work for them. Ron?
I guess I'm wondering if maybe there's a way to make it a little stronger than that by saying that the jurisdiction is required to make a statement about disbursement and fees. That they can't just leave it blank. They actually have to make some kind of a decision about how they want to address that. Because I guess what I'm worried about is a jurisdiction that just adopts this, doesn't address it, and then it leads to problematic situations down the road.
So I'll say within the code, EV code language that exists out there that we looked at, I think there were only a couple of folks that had disbursement and service fees as part of their requirement. So just thinking through that, it seems like a couple of communities in Colorado are moving forward without these in this explicit language in place. But yeah, would love to know what the board thinks about it. So we'll go Will, and then we'll go over to Adam.
So I actually was just going to say, I have an important legislative issue that just came up, so I'm going to need to drop for a few minutes, and I will rejoin. I don't have a strong feeling on this particular one and would defer to other board members unless there's a 2-2 vote on it. But I'll be back in a few minutes.
Okay, thanks, Will. Good luck. Adam?
I just wanted to say that I think in terms of what Ron is saying about having something that a jurisdiction is required to consider, then Ron, I think the only things that we can require are things that are in the code. Like, I don't think we can say in an accompanying report that they must do something, if that makes sense, because they're not adopting that. The language actually has to, if you want them to have to do something, I would say that the language, some language relating to that issue has to be in the code. So that's just my 2 cents.
And you know, I mean, we just heard from Will that, or we just heard that there are places where there is, you know, they're moving forward without these requirements, and maybe it doesn't come up that often, and maybe we can leave that as a risk the jurisdiction takes and just warn them against it. I just, you know, and some jurisdictions aren't going to have this disbursement issue. I'm not expecting to see that in Boulder County, for instance, because we typically don't have, you know, large parking lots that are shared by multiple buildings. So it's not going to come up in the same way. But I think other places might. So.
Yeah, thanks, Ron. Rick or Brad, any thoughts? I haven't heard from you two on this one yet. Yeah, Rick, go for it.
I'm listening and, it's this EV jurisdictional option. Well, if it's an option for the local government, leave it an option. I don't know, I don't know why we're discussing why it should be in code. I mean, I understand we're trying to make, avoid, longer term implementation conflicts or challenges, but leave it to the jurisdictions. They typically will negotiate these things with development. It's give them a little discretion in this regard. So I'd say just leave it out of the code if that's really what we're going to be voting on here.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks, Rick. Brad?
Yeah, I think for the most part, largely in agreement with what's been said so far. I'll offer, a local perspective on a project that, we've had to deal with recently. And, really it came down to what was proposed from the developer and the builder. And then ultimately it got worked with our environmental planning department. So, there were some easement requirements. There were some ways that they were going to run, some of the conduit and things of that nature. So it really is something that needs to be worked through at the jurisdictional level, just because we are seeing that. We as a jurisdiction also, in terms of the fees, did not put anything in place. We wanted that left open, to whoever was installing those chargers to be able to put something in place to be able to determine what or if they were going to charge some fee. Certainly, us as a municipal utility recognize that you can't charge per kilowatt hour, but they can certainly charge by, a rate or some level of fee that they determine. So we've left that flexible and open for those very reasons. So, and it seems to make sense, and it seems to be working here.
Thanks, Brad. Ron?
So Brad, just to make sure I'm understanding what you're saying, are you saying that we should not put either of these in the body of the code and just perhaps mention both these topics in the guidance document to make jurisdictions aware that this is a topic?
That's exactly how I feel. So I just don't see this in the body of the code. We've got plenty of developments that are going in with EV infrastructure right now. This has not been an issue. They typically find the best place to put this infrastructure. And quite frankly, we sort of like the fact that they figure that out, in relation to, service. It also saves cost. The longer you're running, those lines, the more voltage drop you're going to have. Sometimes you got to bring in a little extra size. So let the developer, let the builder, let the engineers figure it out. That's how I feel.
Thanks, Brad.
Seems reasonable. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Ron. Okay, so what I'm hearing from folks is that we'll do these one at a time. For this, we would recommend striking this fully from the body of the code. So I'm going to do this because that's what that would look like. And then we would go, and I'm just going to, I don't know how to maybe do this, but just so we all know what we're doing, add mention to the final report. Add mention, I'll say, of this topic to the final report, so that folks who might need to know about this or would be interested in this have a resource at least to understand what it might be about. Does that look good to folks? Any other thoughts or comments or questions? Okay. Adam, because Will's gone, should we wait till he gets back to host our vote, or would you step in for him, or would we just see if we get a majority and then?
Yeah, I think we only have an issue if we don't have a majority. So
Okay.
that's fine, I think, to vote without him, because from what it's sounding like, I don't think we're going to have an issue with not having a majority. So.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Adam. Okay, so all committee members in favor of striking this jurisdictional option and adding content about it to the final report, please raise your hand. Okay, see 4 votes for striking this. Thank you, guys. You can lower your hands. And we'll just count him as an abstain because he is currently not here. So moving to the service fees, unless anyone wants to suggest a different approach, I would suggest, based on the conversation, that we can keep this as the same. Admin.
Yeah, I think addressing these two topics the same way makes sense.
Okay, great. Thank you, Ron. Awesome. So then in that case, all in favor of, again, striking this and adding it to the final report, please raise your hand. Okay, I see 3 hands raised in favor of, oh, there we go. Okay, 4 hands raised in favor of striking. Thank you, guys. You can lower your hands. And Will, again, will have his vote as an abstain since he is not here. Okay, well, believe it or not, guys, that's everything. Yeah, Tim, go for it.
There was I think a good question in the question and answer. I don't recall if that was addressed. I'd be interested in that answer too. Thank you.
Thanks, Tim. So the question that was dropped in the chat, can anyone name the utility rebate program that are unavailable to folks that are required by code to have EV charging infrastructure? Make sure we confirm that research before moving forward with that jurisdiction or justification. Yeah, absolutely. It was Elizabeth Gilmore who brought that up. And so we can follow up with her and see if she can share the specific example she was citing.
She was mentioning that if it's required by code, it's not eligible. Is that what you're talking about?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, we've run into that in a variety of utility rebate programs that they specifically are targeting measures that are above and beyond the minimum that's being required. So I've run into that in a host of different rebates over the last decades.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Ron.
Yeah.
I appreciate that. Okay. Fantastic. So with that, we can talk about some next steps. So I think we can go ahead and cancel our meeting tomorrow. So we'll remove that from your guys' calendars. Everyone can have their couple of hours back. And so these are the next steps for our team. So we will take, again, all of the changes that were voted on through this meeting and our last meeting. We'll create a redlined code package and a clean code package. Those will be redlined off of the final code package that was voted on by the full board. We'll get you guys that by Thursday so that you guys have a chance to fully read it, fully review it. And then on Monday, May 1st at 10:30, we will have our final voting meeting. So we'll structure that meeting the same as we did for our full board meeting, where we'll send out a form. We'll ask you guys to fill in each section, and we will only be voting on those sections that did not pass the full board vote. So only the things that we've discussed during our executive committee sessions will be voted on. We need a 2/3 vote from the executive committee to pass those provisions.
Majority vote.
Sorry. If you
Yeah,
had a majority
majority
vote.
vote on the ones that failed to get 2/3. A lot of different fractions going on here.
Thank you. So majority vote on all of the provisions, yes, that did not pass the board. So that's the plan moving forward. Are there any questions? All of that sound good to you guys? All righty. Awesome. Well, with that, I will stop sharing my screen. I'll thank you all for the efficient conversations this morning. And Adam or Rick or Mo, if you guys could let Will know that we're all wrapped up, that'd be fantastic. So he doesn't hop back on, wondering where we are. All right. Well, happy Tuesday, everybody. I hope you guys enjoy the rest of your days, and thanks again for all your hard work.